So today we begin with our 10th class, and I think we have been doing very well in terms of going forward with our studies of the Buddha and his Dhamma. So before we formally begin, we will chant our traditional chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa. So the topic that we have today, I think it's exceptionally important because if we look at the 22 vows, and 22 vows, I would say that they are like preamble, their equivalence to our movement is like preamble has got the equivalence with the Constitution of India. It's like a key to understand the Constitution of India. Likewise, the 22 vows that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given us on 14th October 1956 is like a preamble to kind of Buddhism that we would like to bring into this country. And therefore, from that point of view, these chapters that we are discussing have got the relevance. Because there Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given the vow that the people, the Ambedkarite Buddhists, will practice what is called the path of purity, and the path of virtue, path of purity, path of righteousness. And he has actually given the vow. In the Buddha and his Dhamma, there are vows, and I have seen the Marathi draft that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has written, and there actually he talks about this three-fold teachings of the Buddha, where one has to take them as the vow. So what we are studying, as the first sermon of the Buddha and his Dhamma, as a Buddha to his disciples, 5 disciples, here we have seen that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has tried to present the first discourse in a way that will be understood by our people, by the people at large in the modern times. I think we have discussed last time the path of purity, and we have come up with how Baba Saheb Ambedkar looked at the 5 precepts as the path of purity. This section is altogether important because it talks about the Buddhism in totality. And because it talks about the Ashtanga Marga, the Noble Eightfold Path, we have to pay a very special attention to this part of the Buddha and his Dhamma, because Baba Saheb Ambedkar talks about the Ashtanga Marga, the Noble Eightfold Path, and Buddhism is nothing but the Noble Eightfold Path. And as always, Baba Saheb Ambedkar is writing the gist of the understanding of the Pali scripts, Pali text that Baba Saheb Ambedkar read, because we know that Baba Saheb Ambedkar was a scholar of Pali, not only the scholar of Pali, but he has read the Tripitaka. And I have seen the notes as to how Baba Saheb Ambedkar, took down the notes when he read the Pali Tripitaka. But at the same time, Baba Saheb Ambedkar had a wide reading of Buddhism. And it is said, one account says that Baba Saheb Ambedkar had at least 2,000 books related to Buddhism in his library. So that's a huge stack of the books which Baba Saheb Ambedkar had. And he was very early on studying Buddhism. So much so that when he was in Columbia University, he was reading the books on Buddhism, and we have got ample evidences of that. Now, why I am giving you this background? Because when we look at the Arya Ashtangik Marga, or Noble Eightfold Path, or what Baba Saheb Ambedkar calls Ashtanga Marga, is the heart of Buddhism. And this heart of Buddhism is essentially distilled down by Baba Saheb Ambedkar in 5 pages. So when we study this part of the Buddha and his Dhamma, we have to, as I was telling you in the past lectures, that we have to look at every single word, we have to look at every single sentence, we have to try to connect a lot of ideas, and we have to be very, I would say, grounded, very much focused, and have that attitude of to understand something very deeply. So I think we have to bear that attitude to this section 4, and we have to read it from that context. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read these verses, and I'm going to gloss over some of them, which are very profound and very deep. I would say that even if we can fathom the meaning of even a few verses in this section of the Buddha and his Dhamma, we will understand the essential Buddhism. We will understand the fundamental Buddhism. That is the importance of this section. So, that after teaching the path of purity to the 5 Parivrajaka, Buddha has now started teaching them what is called a Noble Eightfold Path. And this is what the verse number 1 says. The Buddha, next addressed the Parivrajakas on the Ashtanga Marga. He said that there are 8 constituents in the Ashtanga Marga. There are 8 constituents, as the name is clear, eightfold path, 8 constituents of the see this path is one. There are 8 constituents. Like even the constituents of the parts, you cannot segregate them into pieces. We have to look them as the singular path, having a lot of different constituents. He began his discourse with the exposition of Sammaditthi, right views, the first and foremost element in the Ashtanga Marga, Sammaditthi. Now, Sammaditthi is the essential and the foremost element in the Noble Eightfold Path. To realize the importance of Sammaditthi, the Buddha said to Parivrajakas, O Parivrajakas, you must realize that the world is a dungeon and man is a prisoner in the dungeon. Now see, if we look at the situation around us, the world is a dungeon, and Baba Ambedkar has invoked a very right metaphor for the state of experiences, the state of being that we are all into. We are like living in a dungeon, a very dark dungeon, and we are grappling with the darkness for a long time. So it's a darkness imbued by the sculpture. It's a darkness imbued by wrong views. It's a darkness imbued by the conditioning that's happening around all of us. So it's a very profound statement, even to realize that we live in a dungeon. Okay, now what is the characteristic of this dungeon? Pay a very close attention to this metaphor of a dungeon. This dungeon is full of darkness. So dark is it that scarce anything at all can rightly be seen by the prisoner. See, when there is when you live in a dark dungeon, it's very difficult to see what's around. You cannot see it. So what happens in a dark dungeon is that you resort to what is called speculation. Okay, so the prisoner cannot see that he is a prisoner. See, the darkness is so dark, I would say, that the prisoner himself or herself cannot see that they are prisoners. We are so habituated to this darkness. We are so conditioned by this darkness that we take darkness as the reality of the existence. Indeed, man has not only become blind by living too long in the darkness, but he very much doubts if any such strange thing as light is said to be can ever exist at all. Now see, the prisoner, if you are living in a prison for a long time, you start doubting whether the world outside exists there and what kind of a world will be there. So similar is our position, similar is our condition, that we have been living in this darkness for such a long time. Like say for example, the darkness of the caste system. The Indian public has been living in that dungeon for years and years and centuries that they cannot but think in terms of the caste only. That's just an example. There are several ways to explain this, as to how we are so blinded by this darkness that we even don't see the possibility that there exists. Very, very beautifully Baba Ambedkar put it. Strange thing as light is said to be can ever exist at all. Now see, this verse number 7 has to be underlined and read many times. Mind is the only instrument through which light can come to man. I'm going to read it again. Mind is the only instrument through which light can come to man. Now see, the Buddha and his Dhamma, we have seen what the Buddha accepted. The Buddha has accepted the importance of mankind and the centrality of the mind. In other religions, they talk about the gods and souls and so on and so forth, after life, before life, and whatnot. But here, in the Buddhist scheme of the thing, the centrality is the mind. And it's very beautifully emphasized by Baba Ambedkar in this verse number 7, the instrument through which light can come to man. Now, how, I would say, I won't use the word fortunate, but, for the sake of using it, I would say how fortunate we have that there is a possibility within each of us to awaken that light within, to, encounter that light through the instrument that we got. We all possess. That's our mind. Mind is the only instrument through which light can come to man. And the 8th verse goes like this. But the mind of these dungeon dwellers is by no means a perfect instrument for the purpose. Now, at the moment, whatever minds we have, they are not the perfect instruments to know to understand the light, to experience that light. Now, see, as I was telling you, how Baba Sahib Ambedkar is an educator. He knows how to educate the people because he has been, professor, he has been a teacher, he has been a public speaker. He had mastered this art of, convincing people. Now, teaching Arya Ashtangik Marga or Ashtanga Marga is not an easy thing to do. And to create a background for, setting us on the path of the Ashtanga Marga, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar does here, needs a lot of skills. And in 5 pages to achieve that goal, as we will see as to how Baba Sahib Ambedkar has unfolded this entire Ashtanga Marga so meticulously and so beautifully and so clearly that we cannot get but, astounded by, his skills here. Now, see, let's follow it through. But the mind of these dungeon dwellers is by no means a perfect instrument for the purpose. It lets through only a little light, just enough to show to those with sight that there is such a thing as darkness. See, the mind just lets a very little light, a very, very small ounce of light, just enough to show those with sight. If you want to remain blind forever, that's our choice. But, if we have even a little bit of sight, some kind of an awakening within, then, it lets those only a little light, just enough to show to those with sight that there is such a thing as darkness and light. So it's very, very important for us to acknowledge that we live in the darkness. And I think that understand that there is a suffering in the world. Now let's, the equivalent of darkness is suffering world, the world which is suffering constantly. And most of the times we don't take suffering, as you don't understand it. We don't try to understand the source of suffering. Likewise, we don't believe that we are living in the dark world. We are living in a dungeon. We are like prisoners. Living, these are very strong metaphors. A prisoner living in a dungeon is not just in a prison, but a prisoner living in a dungeon, dark dungeon, cannot see anything. Thus defective in its nature, such understanding as this is. But no a parivrajakas. The case of the prisoner is not as hopeless as it appears. The situation that appears to be hopeless, weighing down on us, completely dark, it's not that hopeless. So elsewhere, Baba Sahib Ambedkar says that the Buddha's Dhamma is the Dhamma of the hope. It gives man a hope. And hope is a very big word. We can gloss over this word, hope. And who needs hope? The disadvantaged, the disenfranchised people need the hope because the rich people have a lot of things to live by. But what does the people with no resource have to live by? It is the hope. And see, this is the beauty of this verse number 11. But no a parivrajakas. The case of the prisoner is not as hopeless as it appears. It doesn't appear like that. It's not as hopeless. For there is in man a thing called will. You see, we all have this willpower. We have this will. It is one of the dimensions of our mind. There is an emotional dimension of our mind. There is an intellectual dimension of our mind. And there is what is called a volitional dimension of our mind. The ability to will for something. And from there comes the importance of vows, the power of vows. The 22 vows are not just vows. They have a power. If we take them, they produce certain will among us. They set us on certain path for us. So you see what Baba Sahib Ambedkar says, that for there is in a man a thing called will. When the appropriate motives arise, the will can be awakened and set in motion. See, if there is when the appropriate motives arise, and these motives are nothing but Samyak Sankappa, the second second constituent of the Arya Ashtangik Marg. That the will can be awakened and set in motion. So it's not enough to awaken the will, to do the good, but we have to set the will in motion. It's not enough to just awaken the will. We have to set it in motion. We have to make it move. So what verse number 13, very, very clear. With the coming of just enough light, there is just enough light which is coming. And with the coming of just enough light to see in what directions to guide the motions of the will, man may so guide them that they shall lead to liberty. As you know, this continuing the metaphor of a dungeon, a little light coming to the instrument of mind, you awaken your will, you set your will in motion in such a way that the whatever enough light is there, we move our will in the direction of a light. And it will lead to the liberty. If we move our will towards that light, what will happen? It will lead to liberty. It shall lead to liberty. You know, this use of word, it shall. It cannot but lead to liberty. So the liberty of a human being is not somewhere else. The source of liberty is within. And it's not that, you know, the liberty will just happen to us automatically. We have to strive. We have to awaken the will. We have to set it in the motion. Isn't it? And I think that's duty of emancipation lies on the shoulders of each and every human being. It is not that, you know, there will be an external locus of freedom, and that external locus will control our behavior, and you know it will liberate us. There is no God who will come to rescue us. There is no external agency that will be there to come and rescue us. And I think this is very profound, that the ability to liberate lies within each of us. And I find this sentence very profound in a sense. And the 14th, thus though man is bound, though we are bound, yet he may be free. He may at any moment begin to take the first steps that will ultimately bring him to freedom. This verse number 14 is of such a profound consequence. And it ties up with what we have been discussing in terms of patit and fallen, and the people who knows that they are fallen, and the people they don't know that they are fallen because they don't have the standard in their life. This profundity of the statement can be gauged at by looking at this very important sentence, phrase, at any moment. So the possibility of freedom at any moment, when we will to set our will, you know, in that direction of a light. And that light is nothing but the awakened stage of mind, the Buddha himself, the mind of persons like Baba Saheb Ambedkar, you know, to be like them, to imitate them, to live like them, you know, to bring that light they had in their lives into our lives. And it can happen at any moment. We can decide to be free at any moment. We are not bound to live in the prison forever. We can choose to come out of it any moment. But we have to take the first steps that will ultimately bring him to freedom. This is because it is possible to train the mind in whatever directions one chooses. Now, why this is possible? Why the freedom is possible? Because the mind is so malleable. The mind is so, you know, workable, that it's possible to train the mind in any direction. The mind is not something which is, you know, struck. The mind is not something solid. The mind is not something permanent. It's like, you know, there is a theory of soul where, you know, nothing happens to it. It never changes. It never grows. It never, dies. It never takes birth. But here, the quality of the mind is that it can be changed anytime, and it can be trained in any direction. If we want to train the mind in the negative direction, we can do it. If we want to train the mind in the positive direction, we can do it. So this is because it's possible to train the mind in whatever directions one chooses. The will, the ability to choose, taking the first steps. These are very important words, very pregnant words with meaning. It is mind that makes us to be prisoners in the house of life. And it is mind that keeps us so. So it's our mind that enslaves us. And it's our mind that keeps us in the prison of life. But what mind has done that mind can undo? It is not that, you know, what mind has done cannot be undone. So what mind has done can be undone. If it has brought man to thraldom, if it has brought man to slavery, it can also, when rightly directed, bring him to liberty. How profound it is. This is what Sammaditthi can do. This is what Sammaditthi can do. This is the power of Sammaditthi. The power of Sammaditthi lies in making us free, to liberate us from the thraldom that the mind has brought onto us. What is the result of Sammaditthi? What is the end of Sammaditthi? Pay attention, pay attention. What is the end of Sammaditthi? Ask the Parivrajakas. The end of Sammaditthi, the goal of Sammaditthi, the result of Sammaditthi, replied the Buddha, is the destruction of avidya, ignorance. It is opposed to Micchaditti. So we can say that darkness, living in the darkness, is like living in a ignorance. Living in the ignorance is equivalent to saying that living in the Micchaditti. Samma and Miccha. These are two words which are, antonyms. So right view and wrong view. Sammaditthi, perfect vision, and imperfect vision. Asammaditthi or Micchaditti. And avidya means the failure to understand the noble truths. So what is the avidya? Avidya lies in not understanding why humanity suffers. Why do we suffer? Why do I suffer? Why the society suffers? It's that inability to understand the causes of suffering and the removal of suffering. That is avidya. Very succinct and very traditional definition of avidya. Sammaditthi requires giving up of belief in the efficacy of rites and ceremonies to have disbelief in the sanctities of the Shastras. Very clear. This is very clear. Verse number 21. Sammaditthi requires the abandonment of superstition and supernaturalism. We have to abandon the ideas, that are superstitious in nature and supernatural. Sammaditthi requires the abandonment of all doctrines which are mere speculation. So whatever thoughts there are which are speculative in nature, we have to abandon that. And we have to accept those doctrines which have the basis in fact and experience. Very interesting. Facts and experiences. These two words are very key. So as a Buddhist, we don't believe in the truth offered by the books or by the words. What we believe depends on these two things of facts and experience. And what does Sammaditthi requires? Free mind and free thought. If we have a very closed mind, if we have a mind that is, very, what I would say, limited mind, then what happens is that we cannot but think with a very narrow mind. If we want to cultivate the Sammaditthi, the condition is that our mind should be free and we should have free thoughts. That means a mind that is open. That is the mind that is ever ready to learn. It's an open mind. It's a mind that is not latched on to some ideas, latched on to certain opinions to be, sacrosanct. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki says that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. If we have that beginner's mind, that open mind, that first mind, the first thought mind, then there are many possibilities. But if we have the expert's mind, then it's already a formed mind and the possibilities decrease. So in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. That means if your mind is closed, if your thoughts are closed, they are not free. If your mind is not free, then the possibilities of generating many ideas are already, done away with. So what does Sammaditthi require? Sammaditthi requires free mind and free thought. And very profound that is. Every man has aims, aspirations, and ambitions. We all have this. We all have aims. We all have aspirations. We all have ambitions. Samma Sankappo, the second constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path, Ashtanga Marga, teaches that such aims, aspirations, and ambitions shall be noble and praiseworthy and not ignoble and unworthy. So, for example, compassion, karuna, is Samma Sankappo. A will to help others is a Samma Sankalpo. The will to make us free to come out of that dungeon of prison is Samma Sankappo. So Samma Sankappo has a very broad connotation because it deals with our aims, aspirations, and ambitions in our lives. We all have those. But what are all these aims, aspirations, and ambitions? See, this is, if we are a student of literature, then we see this alliteration, what is called alliteration, AAA, like aims, aspirations, and ambitions. The use of the single alphabet to begin, you know. So aims, aspirations, and ambitions shall be noble and praiseworthy. So whatever we want to do in our life, it has to be guided by these two principles of nobility and, blameworthiness. It should be blameless. Now, I think this after the two path comes the Samma Vacha, right speech. And this right speech has become so important for our community that we have to practice this Samma Vacha all the time, because that is one of the reasons. As I was emphasizing, that the community lives in communication, and through communication we hold something in common, and that's what makes us one community. So community is something that holds something in common, and that holding of something in common takes place because of the communication. So communication, this speech is so crucial. The Buddha has said that, the human being is body, mind, and speech. He has given so much of importance of the speech. And the traditional says, it says that the text, it says that, the body is like, perceptible. It's more gross. The mind is very subtle. And between this subtlety of the mind and the grossness of the body lies the speech. And some of the, in the Buddhist text, said that we are born with a sword in our mouth. That's our tongue. So tongue has that power. And we know that Kabir Das has very beautifully said, sabad sabad har koi kahe, sabad ke haath na pao, ek sabad ausud kari, ek sabad kir gao. So everybody, we all utter the words, sabad sabad har koi kahe, sabad ke haath na pao. The word has no hands and legs. But what happens? Ek sabad aushud kari. So what one word can act like a medicine. Ek sabad kir ghav. A word can create wounds forever. So this is the power of the speech. This is the power of the words, and it's so crucial, because see, the practice of untouchability has to do with the practice of excommunication. You don't communicate with this community, isn't it? The caste has to do with the communication, that you debar certain kind of exchange transaction with a particular group of people, and that's how you create the different groups of the people in the community, in the society. But the communication is the key. The communication is a way forward. It's a solution to what can be called excommunication. Now, see, this is very beautifully told by the Buddha and very rightly written by Babasaheb Ambedkar in the verse 25. And I'm going to read it and gloss over each and every sentence of it a bit. So what is Samma Vacha? Samma Vacha teaches one, that one should speak only that which is true. We should speak only that which is true. Second, that one should not speak what is false. See, speaking truth and speaking false are the two different things. And, Babasaheb Ambedkar has categorized, separated these two attributes. We should speak truth, but also we should not speak what is false. Most of the times, we are habituated to, talk in a sense of speaking in a way that, we tell a lot of lies, and we create a lot of illusion of facade of truth. So one should not speak what is false as well. So giving false evidence, talking wrong things about other people. So that one should not speak what is false, that one should not speak evil of others. See what a profound sort of progression that Babasaheb Ambedkar has got. Speak the truth, don't speak what is false, and never speak evil of others. Fourth, that one should refrain from slander. One should refrain from slander. That one should not use angry and abusive language towards any fellow man. See, this Buddha Dhamma has been distilled down by Babasaheb Ambedkar's public life of many years. He has seen the world. He has seen people. He has seen what causes division in the community. He has seen what breaks the organization. He has seen all that in his life. So when he writes Buddha and his Dhamma, he gives us a kind of a remedy for a lot of social problems that even we are facing and toggling with today. So that one should not use angry and abusive language towards any fellow man. Very profound. 6, that one should speak kindly and courteously to all. We should be very kind and courteous to our, when we talk. That one should not indulge in pointless, foolish talk, but let his speech be sensible and to the purpose. Our speech should be sensible and to the purpose. A lot of the times we are involved in the foolish babble. Most of the times we are, because we cannot, but we live in a world that's full of gossips, and some of the scientific theory says that as the gossips are so natural to the human societies, they happen all the time. We love gossiping about film stars, celebrities, and so on and so forth, isn't it? So the gossiping, talking foolish talks, babbling are all part of our speech. Instead of that, we should practice, cultivate sensible talk, sensible speech, and with a purpose. So this is not enough. The verse 25th verse is not enough. Baba Saheb Ambedkar has even devoted another verse to it. Verse number 26. The observance of right speech, as I have explained, is not to be the result of fear or favor. We don't use the right speech to favor somebody or out of fear of somebody. Because sometimes we speak to please somebody, or sometimes we speak in a way to extract flavors from some people. It is not to have the slightest reference to what any superior being may think of his action, or any loss of which right speech may involve. Okay, so we are not doing to please somebody, to get favors from them, or out of fear for somebody. We just speak rightly. We just use right speech because it's right to do it. The norm of right speech is not the order of the superior or the personal benefit to the individual. See, Baba Saheb Ambedkar was an advocate, where he was a lawyer par excellence, and he has dealt with all these false evidences and those people using wrong speeches, and out of fear of somebody or out of favor of somebody, and he has seen all that. So he's packing this right speech, Samma Vacha, in a way that is so useful for our community today. And you see, for Samma Sankappo, Baba Sahib has given only one verse, which is, I think, enough. But for Samma Vacha, he has quite dwelt very deeply into it. He has dwelt quite deeply into it. So now comes to the Samma Kammanto. What is the Samyak Karma, Samyak action? Right action. Samma Kammanto teaches right behavior. It teaches that every action should be founded on the respect for the feelings and rights of others. See, we have to act in the world. We cannot but act in the world. We have to act in the world. But what is the basis of that action? So there are a lot of classification in the Buddhist text about what is the right action. But here Baba Saheb Ambedkar is very clear. He says that every action should be founded on respect for the feelings and rights of others. Two words: feelings of others and rights of others. We have to take this into consideration while we act, whether we are respecting the feelings of others and rights of others. It's very profound. The action part goes very profound if we just take these two words and explore deeply. What is the norm for Samma Kammanto? The norm is that course of conduct which is most in harmony with the fundamental laws of existence. So you take the course in your life which is in harmony with the fundamental laws of existence. So what is the fundamental law of existence? Nahi verena verani sammatiche kudachana. The hatred cannot be dealt away by hatred. Only by non-hatred the hatred can be pacified. Sanatan Dhamma. This is what Buddha calls Sanatan Dhamma, the law of what is called fundamental laws of existence. This is the fundamental law of existence. Never in the world the hatred is conquered by hatred. It has never happened. It will never happen. But the hatred can only be conquered with love. This is the fundamental law of the existence. When his actions are in harmony with these laws, they may be taken to be in accord with Samma Kammanto. Okay, so we finish what is called the fourth constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path. And the fifth is right livelihood, Samma Ajivika. So what is the Samma Ajivika? Every individual has to earn his livelihood, but there are ways and ways of earning one's livelihood. Some are bad, some are good. Bad ways are those which cause injury and injustice to others. Good ways are those which the individual earns his livelihood without causing injury and injustice to others. This is Samma Ajivo. So whatever we do, to earn our livelihood. It should not cause any injury or injustice to others. Now you take this Samma Ajivika to the business classes in these countries, and see how they cause the injuries and injustice to others. You will realize that it's Michcha Ajivo, it's not Samma Ajivo. Making Samma Ajivo part of the Noble Eightfold Path means that the Buddha expected that the majority of his followers will be actually working in the society. Because we know that the bhikkhus, they do not have any ajivika. They don't have to earn their livelihood, but the upasakas have to earn their livelihood. And therefore, their livelihoods we should be in such a way that they should not cause any injury or injustice to others. This is Samma Ajivo. 32, I think, is very important verse. And this is the 6th constituents. And I insist that we pay deeper attention to this, because here lies the importance of will and how we can set our will in the motion. So Samma Vayamo, right endeavor, is primary endeavor to remove avidya. So we should all strive to remove avidya. That means we have to work hard, we have to take responsibility to reach the door that leads out of this painful prison house, to swing it open. Because we are living in the dungeon, the house is locked. So we have to swing the door open. And in order to swing the door open, we have to make efforts. And without making efforts, we cannot be free from this dungeon. To reach the door that leads out of this painful prison house, to swing it open, right endeavor has 4 purposes. Samma Vayamo has 4 purposes. Listen carefully, very important for us in our practical life. One is to prevent states of mind which are in conflict with Ashtanga Marga. So there are some states of mind which are in conflict with the Ashtanga Marga. Superstitious ideas, believing in the efficacy of the rituals, believing in the books, believing in the external agencies. These are the ideas. These are the states of mind like anger, hatred, delusion. These are the states of mind which are in conflict with the Ashtanga Marga. So we have to prevent the states of mind which are in conflict with the Ashtanga Marga. We have to prevent. We don't let them happen in our mind. We don't let them take home in our own minds. Second is to suppress such states of mind which may already have arisen. Certain states of mind which might have already arisen in us, we have to suppress them. We have to do away with them. We have to uproot them. Third is to bring into existence state of mind which will help a man to fulfill the requirements of the Ashtanga Marga. So whatever states of mind we need to fulfill the requirements of the Ashtanga Marga, we have to cultivate them. We have to bring them into us. Fourth is to promote the further growth and increase of such states of mind as already may have arisen. There might be some very good status of mind within us. We might be, a little bit compassionate. We might be, little bit, I would say, other focus. So we have to cultivate these good qualities within us, which supports the Ashtanga Marga, which are already there in us. So for number one, we have to prevent those things which are already negative things which are already arisen. Secondly, we have to suppress, which is not, whatever evil out there, we have to prevent that evil to come to us. Whatever evil or evil mind we have to suppress, uproot that mental state. We have to cultivate something good which is not there within us now. And whatever good we have now, we have to, make it, we have to increase it, we have to make it grow. That was the 6th constituents of the Ashtanga Marga. The 7th, 38th verse. Samma Sati calls for mindfulness and thoughtfulness. It means constant wakefulness of the mind. Watch and ward by the mind over the evil passions is another name of Samma Sati. So Samma Sati is also very important constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path. And very beautiful definition, calls for mindfulness and thoughtfulness. It means constant wakefulness. It's not just one moment of wakefulness, but we have to remain vigilant all the time. For what? Watch and ward by the mind. The mind is watching itself. So we have to develop a quality in our mind by practice that will watch itself. That is Samma Sati. So verse number 39, there are aparivrajaka, 5 fetters or hindrances which come in the way of a person trying to achieve samma ditti, samma sankappo, samma vacha, samma kammanto, samma ajivo, samma vayamo, samma sati. See, today I am going through it fully so that we get a complete picture. And in the future lectures, if we want to explore every constituents, we can do it. But today, what my plan is to really go through the entire picture, give the entire picture, so that we know what does this Ashtanga Marga stands for and mean to us. So let's not slacken our minds now. Let's be alert and pay attention to it. So we want to achieve samma ditti, samma sankappo, samma vacha, samma kammando, samma ajivo, samma vayamo, samma sati. We want to achieve that, but we cannot. Why is that? So there are hindrances, and in Pali they are called neurane. So there are 5 hindrances that doesn't let us practice this 7 wings, 7 constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path. So what are these 5 hindrances? They are, number 1, covetousness, which means kamachanda. In traditional Pali language, it means kamachanda. Hankering after the sensual pleasures, the pleasures of the senses. Second, ill will, avyapad. We have this ill will in us. Sloth and torpor, thinamidda. Our minds are very sleepy, very sluggish. Doubt, and then our mind is full of doubt, and then indecision. So these are the 5 hindrances. Because we have these 5 hindrances, we cannot practice this 7 constituents of the Ashtanga Marga. It is therefore necessary to overcome these hindrances, which are really fetters, and the means to overcome them is through samadhi. So these 5 fetters that we have, which Baba Ambedkar has talked about, which doesn't let us practice the 7 constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path. In order to overcome them, what we have to do is we have to practice samadhi. Now, what is samadhi? Because there is always a doubt, debate, and discussions in the community as to what is the role of samadhi. So the role of samadhi has to be understood in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path. We cannot take samadhi just as it is. We have to understand the context and why we have to practice it. Otherwise, in the community, whether this is good, that is bad, whether Baba Ambedkar has asked us to practice meditation or what. Here in this thing, Baba Ambedkar has not used the word meditation here, at least. So here he's talking about samadhi. So we have to understand the words, because the words has to be understood in the context. So what is the context of this samadhi? Because we cannot practice these 7 constituents. They are very difficult for us because of hindrances. There are barriers which doesn't let us practice these 7 constituents of the Ashtanga Marga. So we have to cultivate samadhi. But no, yes, Parivarajakas, samma samadhi is not the same as samadhi. Now there is a difference. The samadhi and samma samadhi, very different. It is quite different. Now, what is samadhi? Let's look at it. Samadhi is mere concentration. So if everybody has got certain ability to concentrate. A good student has the ability to concentrate his or her mind on the studies. So samadhi is mere concentration. No doubt it leads to dhyanic states. So if your mind becomes concentrated, then it will lead to certain stages of mind. It's natural. If we concentrate our mind on certain object or certain emotion or anything, that concentrated mind leads to dhyanic states, which are self-induced, holding the 5 hindrances in suspense. And when your mind is uplifted like this in the dhyanic stage, then automatically the 5 hindrances are suspended. The sensuality doesn't arise, the ill will doesn't arise, the sloth and torpor doesn't arise, doubt and indecisions do not arise. They are temporarily suspended. Very, very nicely put. But these dhyana states are temporary. Consequently, the suspensions of the hindrances is also temporary. What is necessary is a permanent turn of the mind. You see, what we have to do is we have to turn our mind permanently from these hindrances. Such a permanent turn can be achieved only by samadhi. Such a permanent turn can only be achieved by samadhi. And 43 paragraph or verse. Please listen carefully every word. Mere samadhi is negative in as much as it leads to temporary suspension of the hindrances. In it, there is no training to the mind. There is no training to the mind. Only we suspend the hindrances. And that can happen if you sit sometime quietly or like that, or if you are watching something beautiful sunset, or you're going for a walk in the forest. When your mind is focused, when your mind is relaxed, the dhyanic states are achieved, where a lot of these hindrances are suspended. But that is not a conscious training of the mind. We are not training our mind. And Baba Sahib has been emphasizing time and again, train the mind, train the mind, train the mind. So what is the Samma Samadhi? Samma Samadhi is positive. It's not negative, it's positive. It trains the mind to concentrate and to think of some Kushala Kamma. You see, what a beautifully put. You see, we have this mind and we have to train this mind to concentrate and to think of some Kushala Kamma. This is so deep. Let me explain you this in a traditional words. See, concentration of mind, making mind concentrated is called samatha in the technical terms. Okay. And when your mind is concentrated, when our minds are concentrated, then it has the ability to think about certain deeper things. So when you think of the Kushala Kamma, okay, when you see the way to doing good, it's called vipassana. So samatha and vipassana go hand in hand. You cannot see through unless your mind is focused and concentrated. And the more you see through, the more focused your mind becomes. So now see, it's very beautifully done by Baba Ambedkar here. It trains the mind to concentrate, to achieve a level of a samatha, to concentrate. Okay. And what do we do when we have this concentrated mind? We think of some kusala kamma, good deeds and thoughts during concentration, and thereby eliminate the tendency of the mind to be drawn towards a kusala kamma arising from hindrances. So you see, even the concept of Samma Samadhi is action oriented, because we have to act in the world. If you see certain symbols in Ajanta caves or Ellora caves, there are these various depictions of compassion or whatever. And their one foot is already ready to enter into the world. They are in the deep concentration, but their foot is put forward. They are ever ready to enter in the world and help. So that is the power of meditation, to make us capable of entering into the world and doing good. So it is not just, the sitting and, achieving dhyanic state, temporarily suspending the hindrances. No, we have to try to take a permanent turn of the mind. To take the permanent turn of the mind, we have to think, we have to concentrate mind and, think about doing good. I'm going to read it again. Mere samadhi is negative in as much as it leads to temporary suspension of the hindrances. In it, there is no training to the mind. Samma Samadhi is positive. It trains the mind to concentrate and to think of some kushala kamma, good deeds and thoughts during concentration, and thereby eliminate the tendency of the mind to be drawn towards akusala kamma, bad deeds and bad thoughts arising from the hindrances. So whenever there are these 5 hindrances, the bad thoughts, akusala kamma is bound to happen. And when we act with the akusala kamma, we create more ignorance in the world. We create more darker world. 44 and the last, Samma Samadhi gives a habit to the mind to think of good and always think of good. Habit. We have to cultivate the habit of thinking of good and always to think of good. It's not enough to think of good, but always 24/7. If we can think of good, that is the result of a Samma Samadhi. Samma Samadhi gives the mind the necessary motive power to do good. Now, today I have stretched on a bit because I thought that, this section has to be finished in one session, because there are 8 constituents are Ashtangik Marga, and understanding Ashtangik Marga is understanding the entire Buddha Dhamma. And therefore we have to see the path in totality. And then we can go into details. We can go into details of each constituent. And that's a possibility that always there. But you see, in 5 pages, the way Baba Ambedkar has distilled down the practice and clarified even the controversial concepts in the society, like what is meditation, should the Buddhist in India practice meditation. And I think reading this section, rereading it, gives us not only a perspective on Samma Samadhi, but on every aspects of Buddhism. And that is the beauty of this section. And Baba Ambedkar has put it, Ashtanga Marga, I will follow the Noble Eightfold Path in my life. That is one of the vows in the 22 vows. So this opens up a kind of a clarity for us to understand Buddhism, to study Buddhism, and the most important is to practice Buddhism. So what does the practice of Buddhism entails? If somebody asks us, we have to refer to this section. Go and read it, study it, practice it, follow it. And as I told you that, Baba Ambedkar has put a lot of his life into this book. He has put a lot of efforts into this book. And he's writing this book after drafting the constitution, which was itself a very difficult task, negotiating with, different people and so on and so forth with the idea. So he knew that what needs to be communicated to my people. What does my people understand? How to, because there will be people who will come and, teach different versions of different things. How to give clarity to my people. So this is it. So I think that's enough for today from my side. And I think we should open it up for certain discussion and anything that is on your mind. So the floor is open now.
Mangeshi, good evening.
Good evening, Venugopal Sahab.
Yeah. See, actually, like this following the Ashtanga Marga, I think it is not like a very easy path to follow.
That's true.
So, like, see, let us like slightly like digress from whatever you told. In this today's world of like competition and ambition to achieve more, like how this Ashtanga Marga is going to help the youngsters.
Yes.
How to motivate them like to like seek Ashtanga Marga so that they'll be like a success, whatever is like being said, like okay, becoming some a great entrepreneur or like achieving some success in the like social life. Yes. So that kind of things. How like this Ashtanga Marga can be useful?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Just I thought that I can give some ideas on that.
No, sir, that's very, very good point. You see, this path given by the Buddha or Baba Ambedkar is not an easy path. And Baba Ambedkar has made it clear that he said that the Dhamma I'm giving is not easy. You have to make efforts, and he said that I need 5 people who will walk on the edge of the sword. I don't need the crowd. So such is the power of this Noble Eightfold Path, that it's not easy to practice. And to be free is not, if it were easy for a human being to be free, it won't appear to be that difficult. But we can understand from this that the path is difficult. It's not easy. Okay, looks very easy on the paper, but it's very difficult to practice. So
Mangeshi, like I'll paraphrase my question in a different way. Yes, like for example, like the kind of popularity this Jaggi Vasudev, Sadguru, the so-called Sadguru, or for that matter, this Sri Ravi Shankar.
Yes.
Okay, these people, they're having the millions of followers.
Yes.
Right, but actually, like what they are saying in one sense is actually they are talking about Buddha.
Yes, you're right.
But without quoting Buddha, they're talking about Buddha and his Ashtanga Marga.
Yes.
Isn't it? Like broadly, okay, like so Shiva and all these things leaving aside, yes, but these people, some of the aspects, what I'm like saying is like they're talking about the spirit, Atma, rebirth, and all these things. Slightly, they're like talking on the borderline of. So, what do you say on that? Like, see, my question to you is, like, how to like popularize this Ashtanga Marga amongst the public?
Yeah.
Like, sir, how to like make it?
Yes, sir. Sir, I will come to that.
Yeah.
You have rightly said that the present so-called Hindu gurus, they borrow a lot of ideas from the Buddha, because the Brahminical religion lacks that kind of a spirituality. It's only about rules and regulation, caste and rituals and so on and so forth. So they borrow. Even the people like Vivekananda and all this host of so-called gurus, including Osho and whatever. So the point is, sir, is that we have started, now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there are teachers in the world, in the Buddhist
Mm.
world, in China, Japan, and all. They have mastered the art of communicating the people in the communicating Buddhism in a popular language that will appeal to the youths.
Okay.
Isn't it? So for example, there in Malaysia, there are groups which of the youngsters who sing songs and, create that kind of a cultural sort of appeal to the youths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't
like for me, like it looks like Buddhism is like a very serious religion. Just like that, you cannot like approach it with kind of fun and.
That's one of the misconceptions. The Buddhism is the religion of joy. If there is any religion of joy in the world, that is Buddhism.
Provided people know that,
So that's why we have these classes, sir, to thrash the ideas, think through things. There are a lot of youngsters in us within this group, and it reaches to a few young people, and I'm sure that they will be motivated because they will find some use in their life. And we are just sowing the seeds, sir. So let's.
An excellent exposition, Mangesh, like very well articulated. Like first time hearing your lecture, like really, like I'm quite impressed. Great, actually.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Like I want to listen to your earlier episodes also. I think they are available on YouTube, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What you are saying that I want to say that these people are young generation. They have now restricted from their progress. No one can restrict. And only thing that they must have the right aims and aspirations. Okay, and then only they will develop a will. They will have a will to do some action in this direction. Okay, this is samadhi. They must have first right thoughts in their mind, what they want to do, what are their aspirations, what are their aims. Yes. So they can direct their action will in that direction.
Yes. Ma'am, that is what Mangesh is talking about AAA. Aim, ambition, and aspirations.
Yes.
Mangesh, I think that is you are mentioning that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a good one actually.
What is happening, sir, in the places like as Madam has been talking about, in the places in some parts of Maharashtra, there are Buddha Vihars, as you might be knowing, and those Buddha Vihars have now become very interesting places where the young people go and study for their careers and all. The town I came from in Bhandara, we have this a very flourishing Buddha Vihar, and about 30, 40, more than that, people have got into jobs over last 20 years. And then women go there and, they practice together. And so I think we have a long way to go, but we will be there, sir, one day.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Say, like in both the Andhras, both
sir.
Telangana and Andhra Pradesh now,
sir.
Like a lot of the 2000-year-old heritage places are there and different places.
Yes.
Like in actually they are getting like excavated now, and we are trying to give some importance to that.
I have been to some of them, sir. Like Dhulikatta, I have been there.
Yeah.
And then Panigiri and other places, Nagarjunakonda.
Yeah.
And Visakhapatnam, sir. Yes, sir. And people are claiming that they are their sites. That's very important.
That is what is happening there.
Yes. So anything else?
Mangesh, after that you can give a call to me. Say, shared my number.
I will do, sir. I will do. I will. You can share your number here.
I shared my number.
Okay.
You can see that one.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, then. Anybody wants to share? Alka Madam, Gaikwad Sahab, Ranjit Bhai, Richa, Dr. Sunanda Madam. Anything? Anybody wants to share anything? If not, then
yeah.
Yes,
Samma Samadhi. Samadhi is mere concentration. It's like when these people just pray or pray, they do prayers and they mantra and all this recite. At that time, these 5 hindrances are left behind for some time. There is temporary suspension.
Right.
So there is no concentration. Their mind in permanent direction. There is no training to their mind in permanent direction. So this is difference between Samma Samadhi and mere Samadhi.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
we don't understand that difference, and then Samadhi we simply give importance to Samadhi, and then there are lot of doubts regarding this word Samadhi.
You see, in the animal kingdom and in the Zen tradition of Buddhism, there is an example of a frog. So frog, sits, for a long time and observes the insect. And at the right moment, that frogs eats the insect. That's also, frog also has a concentration, right? Also, there is an example of, I don't know, I forgot in English what is called bagla in Marathi. That's a bird which picks on the fish all the time. So it's also like, sitting quietly for a long time, concentrating on the movements of the fish and just swoop over them and, grabs them. So its concentration is very basic to the human beings, but that turn of the mind to think of good and doing good, and that habit, that cultivation of that habit of mind, I think is a key. So the Buddhist Samma Samadhi, it has a whole technology of mind in Buddhism as to how we can develop various stages of mind, and Buddhism has gone much more ahead in that field, to the level that the Buddhist mind is studied in the laboratories of the West. So, but the high point is the compassionate mind. So when we have the mind full of compassion, because compassion is something very magical. When our mind, goes out to cultivate that boundless love for the humanity, it is said that the one thought of compassion, karuna, one thought of well-being of the world can eliminate so much of your bad thoughts and bad karma in a way. That is the power of compassion. So the ultimate aim of the Buddhist meditation, as Baba Ambedkar has said, is to cultivate that heart of compassion, the boundless mind, which is not inhibited by our own sense of self, our own sense of community, but the boundless mind, the limitless mind, the limitless consciousness. So we can go into that maybe in the latter discussions.
And because when these temporary states are removed, then again their minds are filled with the defilements like ill will, covetousness, and doubt, indecision like this.
Right.
So there is no permanent training to the mind in mere samadhi.
Right.
Actually, it's so noticeable to see the flow of this Arya Ashtangik Marga. It starts with the Samyak Ditti, and it has so much importance laid on Samyak Ditti. And as you were telling that we can go in further details, I think so it will be really best if you can put it, for youngsters especially, some action points which can be taken in today's world, today's modern world, how we can practice, this whole 8 constituents in our daily life or in our life, so as to develop it as a culture, as a Buddhist culture. Some action points and tools which we can practice that will develop a culture, I think so.
Very true. Ruchad, I think you are now studying Pali and other things. You are the best person to do it. You know the young people's mind, and I think I would encourage you to really come up with that. We will help you. I will help you for sure.
Yeah,
thank you, sir.
She wants flow chart.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Because the wheel must be set in motion, right? That's why.
Yes. Very good.
Very good. We can do that.
Yeah, we will.
If there is nothing as such on your mind, I think we have exceeded our 1 hour, and we'll meet again soon. Unless there is anything heavy on your mind that you cannot release it without talking, please share, or we will end our meeting today, end our class.
I think they have a doubt regarding Samadhi, but they are not asking.
You see, you don't expect everything to be cleared up in one class. We are now
yes.
Just in the book 2, and I think part 2. We have a long way to go, and I think this discussion is important because it gives us a framework to think about now the other parts of Buddha and Dhamma.
Mangeshi said there is one question in the chat. Kindly see this one. Many people say that they prefer atheism over atheism because Buddhism is hard to follow. Someone is saying that one.
Okay. See, there is a trend, this is because of the lack of understanding of what constitutes a religion. That's why people turn to atheism. The reason that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has turned to Buddhism is not just as a religion. It's a kind of, I think what is atheism? These are the Western ideas of thinking about, whether the world is created by God or not. And the Buddhists never fall in this discussion of, the creation and creator. Because, the theories and the science offered by the Buddha says that nothing is created, everything has evolved. And everything is process. It's not a product. We all in transition. Everything is in the flux. So when everything is in the flux, anicca, we cannot have a creator or non-creator. These ways of thinking, theism and atheism, I think they are the Western ways of thinking about the religion and not religion. But Buddhism is a different ball game altogether. It has nothing to do with religion in a sense of a religion. It has nothing to do with this theism or atheism. It has to do with how we can cultivate our mind. And I think that is what is the beauty of Buddhism. And, a lot of people try to equate Buddhism with religion. Of course, it's a religion in the sense that it makes us do things religiously. There's a difference between religion and doing things religiously, because there are certain emotions in the human beings which are religious in nature. There are certain emotions, when we see something, some positive human beings, we are motivated to imitate them. If we see something, we see somebody suffer, we want to do something about it. What I'm trying to get it at is, we have to understand that the Buddhism doesn't fall in the trap of religion, non-religion, theism, atheism. They are all belief system. And Buddhism is not a belief system. Let's be clear on that. The Buddhists don't offer any belief system. And because the Buddhism doesn't offer any belief system, it has nothing to do with theism and atheism. What it has to do with is very clear. Is to cultivate the mind in a way that will do good to the world, and the world will evolve further. So the moral order of the world will evolve. It doesn't depend on the creator. The moral of the universe depends on our karmas, our actions in the world. And therefore, I think this is more profound than, the discussion on theism and atheism. Actually, it boils down to the fact that as a human being, the fundamental fact that we all experience is the fact of suffering. We suffer all the time. The community suffers all the time. That doesn't make Buddhism negative, because as I told you, that Buddhism is a religion of a joy. When you do good, you cannot be but joyful. When you help somebody, the natural emotion that comes to you is, feeling of happiness, satisfaction, and so on and so forth. So what I'm thinking is, we have to have this discussion and on a scale in the communities on Buddhism, understanding the correct perspective on Buddhism. And once that correct perspective on Buddhism is achieved, I think the debates on people preferring theism, because I see the trend among the educated youngster among the Ambedkarite field, what we have to do with Buddhism. It's a religion. We don't believe in God and all that. So believe in God or no God, it's a different matter altogether. The heart of the matter is, whether are you contributing to goodness in the world? Are you trying to do away with the suffering that we all face, and where is the path to end that suffering? You see what I'm saying? And the Buddha offers the path to the end of the suffering. So I think this question is valid in the context, and we can certainly answer that question from the Ambedkarite Buddhist point of view, for sure.
Yeah, what I think that people find difficult to follow Panchashil. And then Panchashil is must to before practicing Eightfold Path. But when there is question of following Panchashil, it becomes difficult for them, and they start blaming the Dhamma, and they don't understand Arya Ashtanga Marga.
No, I think Dishant's point is, I think, valid in the sense of, because many people construe Ashtanga Marga or Buddhism just as a personal path. But dukkha has a lot of dimension. It has a huge bandwidth, which includes social dukkha. Like the caste dukkha is a social dukkha. The racial dukkha is a social dukkha. So I think Dishant has a point in a sense, and Baba Saheb Ambedkar has made it clear that the social dukkha can be done away with by practice of Arya Ashtangik Marga, and we all have to think together as to how we cultivate that path together in the world, so that we deal away with this kind of dukkhas.
Yeah, hi, Namo Buddhaya, Mangesh.
Namo Buddhaya, Harsh.
Yes, sir. I want to answer the question about atheism.
Please, please.
So, I'm from Telangana, Nizamabad district. I'm an advocate, and I have friends of who have organization of atheist and rationalist groups, and I have communication with them also, and most of them they find Buddhism as a genuine way of life. Of course, they don't believe in a religious type of system, but when it comes to the Dhamma part, they believe Buddhism as a perfect system which everyone has to follow in this modern world. Yes, that's it.
All right, then. Thank you so much for today, and we will meet next Saturday at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thank you.